It was a Tuesday afternoon when he walked into my barber shop. I remember because Tuesdays are usually slow, giving me time to reorganize supplies and deep clean the stations. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, his silhouette backlit by the golden afternoon sun streaming through the windows. I looked up from wiping down my station, and our eyes met briefly before he glanced away, a shy smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He wasn't my regular client, but there was something familiar about him that I couldn't quite place. Perhaps I'd seen him walking past the shop on his way to the coffee house down the street, or maybe he'd been in once before when one of my colleagues was working. Either way, there was an immediate connection that seemed to transcend our brief acquaintance. I'm not typically nervous around new clients. After 5 years of cutting hair and perfecting my craft, I've developed a comfortable rapport with strangers. It's part of the job, making people feel at ease while they sit vulnerable in your chair, trusting you with their appearance. But something about this particular client made my heart beat a little faster, my palms slightly damper than usual as I gestured toward my empty chair. "Have a seat," I said, trying to sound casual and professional despite the inexplicable flutter in my chest. "What can I do for you today?" He settled into the black leather chair, his frame fitting perfectly against the contours as if the seat had been waiting just for him. His eyes met mine in the mirror, holding my gaze for a moment longer than strictly necessary before he spoke. "Just a trim," he said, his voice deeper than I expected, with a slight rasp that suggested he might be a singer or perhaps just recovering from a cold. And he hesitated, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "I need my neck shaved carefully." Very carefully. There was something in the way he emphasized the word carefully that caught my attention. It wasn't just the standard request for precision that most clients make. There was a vulnerability in his voice, an underlying meaning I couldn't quite decipher. I nodded professionally, draping the cape around his shoulders, my fingers brushing against the warm skin of his neck for just a moment. I felt him tense slightly at the contact, then relax as I fastened the cape securely. "Of course," I assured him, our eyes meeting again in the mirror. "I always take extra care with neck shaves. It's a delicate area. Let me explain why this matters so much in our profession. The neck is one of the most vulnerable parts of the body. When someone allows you to place a razor against their throat, they're extending an extraordinary level of trust. It's an intimate act that dates back centuries, from the time when barbers were also surgeons and bloodletters. There's a historical weight to this simple service that most people don't consciously recognize, but they feel it instinctively. The neck contains vital arteries, the windpipe, and is largely unprotected. Offering it to someone else's blade is an act of surrender that requires complete trust. As I began to work on his hair, I found myself unusually aware of my movements, taking extra care with each snip of the scissors. We chatted casually about the weather, about the recent renovation of the coffee shop down the street, about nothing and everything. The conversation flowed easily between us, punctuated by comfortable silences that didn't feel awkward, but rather like pauses in a well-rehearsed dance. I learned he was a musician. My intuition about his voice had been correct, who had recently moved to the area to work with a local recording studio. He'd grown up in a small town about 3 hours away, and this was his first time living in a city. "It's different," he said, his eyes following my movements in the mirror. "Everyone's so close together, but somehow more distant at the same time. Back home, everyone knew everything about you. Here, I can be anonymous, reinvent myself. And is that what you want?" I asked, meeting his gaze in the reflection. "To reinvent yourself?" He considered the question for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "Not reinvent exactly. More like, become more fully myself without the weight of others' expectations." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Wasn't that why I'd moved here myself, 5 years ago? To escape the small-town expectations, the predetermined path that had been laid out for me since childhood? To discover who I could be when no one was telling me who I should be? As I finished the trim, I noticed him growing quieter, more tense. His shoulders had risen slightly beneath the cape, and his fingers were gripping the armrests a little tighter than necessary. The moment for the next shave was approaching, and it clearly meant something significant to him. "We're almost ready for the next shave," I said softly, setting down my scissors and reaching for the hot towel I'd prepared earlier. "Is there anything specific I should know? Any particular sensitivity or preference?" He swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing beneath the smooth skin of his throat. He started, then paused, seeming to reconsider his words. I have a scar on the back of my neck. It's sensitive, both physically and... He trailed off, leaving the emotional sensitivity unspoken, but clearly implied. I nodded, understanding dawning. I'll be very careful, I promised, my voice gentle. You can trust me. The weight of those 3 simple words, you can trust me, hung in the air between us. In a world where trust is increasingly rare and precious, offering it so sincerely felt like extending a hand across a divide. I meant it completely, not just as a barber promising professional care, but as one human being connecting with another. I wrapped the hot towel around his neck and the lower part of his face, watching as his eyes closed involuntarily at the comforting warmth. This is one of my favorite parts of the barbering experience, the moment when clients surrender to the simple pleasure of warmth and care. Their features often relax, the lines of stress and worry temporarily smoothed away. His face was no exception, the slight furrow between his brows easing as the heat from the towel penetrated his skin. After removing the towel, I began to apply the shaving cream, my fingers moving in small circular motions to create a rich lather. The scent of sandalwood filled the space between us, my signature shaving cream that I mix myself with essential oils and natural ingredients. I've always believed that the olfactory experience is as important as the visual one, that memories are often tied to scents more strongly than to sights. That smells amazing, he murmured, his eyes still closed, voice slightly muffled by the remaining shaving cream around his mouth. Thank you, I replied, pleased by his appreciation. I make it myself. Sandalwood base with hints of cedar and bergamot. It reminds me of something, he said thoughtfully. I can't quite place it, but it's familiar. Comforting. I smiled, though he couldn't see it with his eyes closed. That's exactly what I aim for. Something new but nostalgic at the same time. As I picked up the straight razor, I felt a slight tremor in my hand that I hadn't experienced since my apprentice days. I took a deep breath, centering myself. This wasn't just any shave, this was important to him, which made it important to me. I tested the blade against the pad of my thumb, an old habit to ensure its sharpness, then positioned myself behind him. I'm going to start now, I said softly, giving him fair warning. Try to stay still, but don't tense up. Just breathe normally. He nodded almost imperceptibly, and I saw his chest rise with a deep breath before he settled into a more natural rhythm. I placed my left hand gently on his shoulder, both to steady him and to establish a connection, a silent reassurance that I was there, present and attentive to his needs. With my right hand, I brought the razor to his skin, starting at the edge of his jawline where it was safest, where I could establish a rhythm and build trust before moving to more vulnerable areas. The blade glided smoothly through the cream, revealing clean skin in its wake. I worked methodically, each stroke deliberate and precise, rinsing the blade between passes to ensure optimal performance. As I moved toward the front of his throat, I felt his pulse quicken beneath my fingers. It's a natural response, the body's instinctive reaction to having a sharp object near vital areas. I paused, waiting for him to adjust, to remember consciously what his body was reacting to unconsciously. You're doing great, I murmured, my voice low and steady. We're almost halfway done. He exhaled slowly, deliberately, and I felt some of the tension leave his body. I continued, moving with even greater care as I navigated the contours of his throat, the vulnerable hollow beneath his Adam's apple, the subtle curves that make each person's neck unique. When I finally reached the back of his neck, where he'd mentioned the scar, I slowed my pace even further. I could see it now, a thin, silvery line about 3 inches long that ran diagonally from just below his hairline toward his right shoulder. It wasn't particularly noticeable unless you were looking for it, but I could tell from its precision that it had been surgical rather than accidental. I'm going to work around your scar now, I informed him quietly. Let me know if anything feels uncomfortable. He nodded, and I detected a slight hitch in his breathing as the razor approached the marked skin. I adjusted my angle, using shorter, more controlled strokes, careful not to apply too much pressure. As the blade made contact near the edge of the scar, his breath caught audibly, not in pain, I didn't think, but in some complex emotion I couldn't fully read. To my surprise, I realized my own breathing had synchronized with his, my inhale matching his, my breath holding when his did. It was an unconscious mirroring, the kind that happens between people who are deeply attuned to each other's physical and emotional states. I hadn't even noticed it happening until that moment of shared suspension, that mutual pause between breaths. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, the razor hovering just above his skin. "Yes," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, no one has touched it since the surgery. 3 years, and I've always cut my own hair, shaved my own neck, because I couldn't bear the thought of explaining it to anyone." The significance of his trust hit me with full force then. This wasn't just about a haircut or a shave. This was about allowing someone else to see and touch a part of himself that he had kept hidden, protected. I felt honored and humbled by his vulnerability, by the courage it must have taken to sit in my chair and make this request. "You don't have to explain anything to me," I assured him, resuming my careful work around the scar. "But I'm here if you want to talk about it." There was a moment of silence, filled only by the soft scrape of the razor against skin and the distant sounds of traffic outside. Then, as if the physical unburdening had opened a channel for emotional release, he began to speak. "It was a tumor," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Benign, thankfully, but it was growing in a dangerous place, pressing against my spine. They weren't sure if I'd be able to play guitar again after the surgery. There was a risk of nerve damage." My hands remained steady, though my heart ached for what he must have gone through. For a musician, the threat of losing the ability to play would be devastating, like a painter facing blindness or a dancer confronting paralysis. "But you can still play?" I asked, carefully navigating the final section of his neck. "Yes," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even though I couldn't see his face from my position. "Better than ever, actually. The pain I didn't even realize was affecting my playing is gone. But the scar, it became a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. I couldn't look at it without remembering the fear." "And now?" I asked gently, wiping away the last traces of shaving cream with a warm, damp towel. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Now it feels like maybe it can be something else. A reminder that I survived, that I'm still here, still playing, still becoming who I'm meant to be." I moved around to face him, our eyes meeting directly rather than through the mirror's reflection. There was something powerful in that direct gaze, an unmediated connection that felt significant in ways I couldn't fully articulate. "All finished," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. I reached for the hand mirror to show him the back of his neck, a standard part of the service that suddenly felt like an important ritual, a unveiling of something meaningful. He took the mirror, angling it to see my work, his eyes focused on the reflection of his neck, on the scar that was now surrounded by perfectly groomed skin. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I felt a flutter of anxiety. Had I done something wrong? Had I somehow hurt him despite my care? But then I saw it, the slight trembling of his hand holding the mirror, the sheen of moisture in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. "It's perfect," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they contained multitudes. They weren't just gratitude for a service well rendered, but acknowledgement of something deeper, the care I'd taken, the respect I'd shown for his vulnerability, the space I'd created for his story to be shared without judgment. As I removed the cape, shaking it free of stray hairs, he stood from the chair, seeming somehow taller, more present in his body than when he'd first sat down. He reached for his wallet, but I found myself wishing there was a way to tell him that what had just transpired between us transcended the usual business transaction. That I would have done it for free, just for the privilege of being trusted with his vulnerability, with his story. Of course, I couldn't say that. We were still barber and client, still bound by professional boundaries despite the intimacy of the moment we'd shared. So I accepted his payment and the generous tip he added, thanking him with a smile that I hoped conveyed more than my words could. "Same time next month?" I asked as I walked him to the door, trying to keep my voice casual despite my hope that he would say yes, that this wouldn't be a one-time encounter. He turned to me, his hand on the door handle, his eyes meeting mine with a warmth that made my heart skip. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Very much." As he left, the bell jingling softly behind him, I stood for a moment in the empty shop, feeling as though something significant had shifted in my universe. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly present. It was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who understood what it meant to reinvent yourself, to become more fully who you are meant to be. I returned to my station, cleaning my tools with methodical care, my mind replaying the feel of the razor in my hand, the trust in his eyes, the synchronized catch of our breath as blade met scar. In a profession built on transformation, on helping people look like their best selves, or sometimes like entirely new selves, it's rare to feel transformed yourself by an encounter with a client. But that's exactly what had happened. The next month, when he returned, something had changed between us. The professional boundary was still there, but it had become permeable, allowing friendship to flow through it. And in the months that followed, as he sat in my chair again and again, as I carefully shaved his neck with the same attention I'd shown that first time, our connection deepened into something neither of us had expected, but both of us treasured. Sometimes the most profound connections begin in the simplest moments: a request made with vulnerability, a service performed with care, a breath hitched in unison, blade steady against skin. Sometimes trust, once extended and honored, grows into something beautiful and enduring. And sometimes, in the most unexpected places, like a barbershop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, we find the people who help us not to reinvent ourselves, but to become more fully who we've always been meant to be. Total _chart_count, 13,683.